At first glance, it was a dream come true. Priya Sharma, radiant in her gold-embroidered lehenga, walked into a world of elegance and wealth that seemed almost untouchable. The wedding hall shimmered under glittering chandeliers, filled with the laughter and applause of friends and family. Yet, amid the celebration, a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken story hidden behind smiles. It was a day where love, ambition, and illusion intersected, masking the shadows that would soon engulf her life. Every detail, from the meticulously arranged flowers to the flowing silk drapes, projected perfection, yet the promise of happiness concealed a deadly plan. Priya Sharma's life before Dubai was marked by simplicity, ambition, and care for her family. In her modest apartment, she pursued her career in finance with dedication, balancing her professional dreams with familial love. Friends described her as intelligent, cautious, and determined, yet filled with hope for a life of happiness and companionship. Little did anyone know that this optimism would later become the very vulnerability that someone would exploit with lethal precision. Her trust and open-hearted nature, traits that had nurtured relationships her entire life, now set the stage for manipulation by a man whose charm hid dangerous intent. Arjun Mehra's life in Dubai represented the pinnacle of wealth and influence. His penthouse, perched high above the city, gleamed with luxury and precision. To outsiders, he was the epitome of charm and sophistication, a successful businessman with a commanding presence. But wealth can conceal darker truths. Behind the walls of this glamorous suite, the seeds of betrayal were being quietly sown, laying the groundwork for a tragedy that would shatter lives. Every lavish detail, every gleaming surface, was part of an environment carefully curated to project power, while simultaneously facilitating a crime that would remain hidden until too late. Publicly, their life appeared perfect, a curated digital narrative of happiness, luxury, and affection. Priya's social media posts radiated joy, masking the growing tension behind closed doors. Every photograph and caption was carefully orchestrated to maintain appearances, hiding subtle signs of unease. In reality, these images would become digital evidence of isolation, manipulation, and a dangerous trust placed in the hands of someone whose intentions were far from innocent. The contrast between the filtered perfection online and the grim reality inside the penthouse foreshadowed the sinister plot that would soon unfold, leaving no room for deception to remain unnoticed. Within weeks of her arrival in Dubai, Priya began experiencing unusual fatigue and dizziness. At first, it seemed minor, the stress of travel and adjusting to a new life, but the symptoms intensified, leaving her weak and vulnerable. Every gesture of care from Arjun, seemingly attentive, masked an underlying intention. These early signs, subtle and easily overlooked, were the first indicators of a carefully orchestrated plan that would soon claim her life. Unseen and unheard, the tension was building, unnoticed by even those closest to her, as the facade of luxury and happiness obscured the imminent danger. As the days progressed, Priya was guided to a series of medical appointments that seemed routine but were far from ordinary. Investigators later revealed that these clinics were part of a carefully orchestrated network. Every appointment had been coordinated in advance, with details designed to conceal the true nature of Arjun's intent. Priya, trusting her husband, followed instructions dutifully, unaware that each visit brought her closer to danger. Behind the sterile walls of the clinics, plans were quietly unfolding, laying the groundwork for a crime executed with clinical precision. The innocence of her compliance would tragically intersect with a calculated scheme driven by greed, ambition, and the cold mechanics of premeditation. Isolation became an invisible weapon. While the city below buzzed with life, Priya found herself increasingly cut off from friends, family, and support. Calls were delayed, messages ignored, and social interactions minimized under the guise of rest and adjustment. Arjun's subtle control over her environment, combined with her trust, ensured that the isolation felt natural rather than imposed. But this separation was deliberate. By weakening her social connections, her ability to seek help diminished, creating the perfect conditions for a crime that would strike without immediate intervention. Every moment alone heightened the vulnerability that Arjun had cultivated meticulously over weeks. Unseen by most, Priya's subtle pleas for help began to surface in messages to her family. Words of unease and discomfort, lightly veiled behind assurances, hinted at the growing danger she faced. These digital breadcrumbs, almost imperceptible, would later form a critical component of the investigation. At the time, however, they were overlooked, easily dismissed as minor illness or adjustment fatigue. Yet, within the careful orchestration of Arjun's plan, each message highlighted the methodical progression of his actions, a slow tightening of control that brought the threat closer to its inevitable, horrifying conclusion. Arjun's charm was deliberate, a mask for calculated manipulation. To any observer, he appeared caring, attentive, and generous. He offered comfort, guidance, and reassurance, all while advancing a carefully concealed agenda. This duality, warmth-masking threat, was central to his plan. Investigators would later note that such behavioral control is often a hallmark of premeditated crimes, where psychological manipulation ensures compliance and obscures suspicion. Priya, trusting and unsuspecting, could not detect the danger that lurked behind the measured gestures and orchestrated smiles. Every interaction strengthened the illusion of care, while simultaneously narrowing the margin of safety around her life. As night fell, the penthouse became a silent stage for the unfolding tragedy. The glittering city below contrasted starkly with the tension within, where wealth and elegance concealed imminent danger. Investigators would later note that the timing of events, the careful coordination of isolation, medical appointments, and household staff schedules, was deliberate, ensuring that no intervention could occur. This night marked the threshold of the ultimate crime, where premeditation, opportunity, and human vulnerability intersected. Every glowing window, every silent room, would bear witness to the meticulous orchestration of a murder disguised beneath the guise of normalcy. Investigators would later reveal that the presence of medical instruments in the penthouse bathroom was no coincidence. The tools were arranged with deliberate precision, sterilized, and accompanied by detailed charts outlining blood type compatibility and procedural steps. To an outsider, the scene could appear orderly or even professional, but forensic analysis quickly demonstrated the deadly intent behind the arrangement. These instruments were not for routine care. They were instruments of premeditated crime. Every item, from the carefully selected surgical scalpel to the sanitized gauze pads, reflected meticulous planning and knowledge of anatomy. Arjun Mehra had orchestrated an environment in which he could exploit Priya's vulnerability, remove her kidney without immediate detection, and maintain control over the situation. This chilling level of preparation underscored the calculated, clinical nature of the murder. The presence of tools, charts, and supplies, seemingly mundane, would ultimately provide investigators with irrefutable evidence of premeditation and intent. By the third week after her arrival, Priya's health had deteriorated markedly. Investigators found evidence that her weakness was compounded by sedatives and other medications administered without her knowledge, gradually rendering her compliant and less capable of resistance. Friends and family, observing from afar, were unaware of the manipulation. Only her subtle messages hinted at mounting unease. This gradual erosion of autonomy was no accident. Every moment of fatigue, every subdued gesture, had been induced to facilitate the ultimate crime. Investigators later emphasized that such prolonged, deliberate weakening of a victim is a hallmark of highly calculated crimes, where the perpetrator seeks to eliminate obstacles while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Priya's compromised state was therefore both a consequence and a prelude, a physical manifestation of the manipulation that had been orchestrated to ensure the success of the deadly plan. Her isolation, coupled with her physical vulnerability, made her the perfect target for a crime executed with chilling efficiency. Digital evidence became a cornerstone of the investigation. Encrypted messages and online search histories, recovered from Arjun's devices, revealed a meticulously constructed timeline leading up to Priya's murder. Investigators discovered searches on kidney compatibility, surgical procedures, and hospital equipment, all conducted days before the crime. Financial transactions corroborated these findings, showing prepayment for consultations, instruments, and specialized medical personnel. This digital trail exposed a chilling reality. Arjun's actions were deliberate, coordinated, and unrelenting. Each keystroke and transfer of funds was a calculated move toward a premeditated outcome. Unlike crimes of passion or impulse, this murder reflected an almost surgical level of planning, where both digital and physical environments were manipulated to achieve a singular goal. Every piece of electronic evidence painted a portrait of someone willing to exploit technology, trust, and opportunity to execute a crime with ruthless precision. Isolation had become a silent weapon. By carefully controlling her environment, Arjun ensured that Priya's connection to the outside world diminished daily. Investigators later noted that social isolation is a critical tool in premeditated crimes, making victims more reliant on the perpetrator and reducing the likelihood of outside intervention. Priya's confinement, framed as care or adjustment to a new city, left her vulnerable both physically and psychologically. Her body weakened from sedatives, her mind burdened by subtle manipulation, and her trust misused. She was trapped within the very luxury that initially seemed protective. This isolation, invisible to outsiders, would ultimately provide the perfect conditions for a crime executed with meticulous precision. The penthouse, once a symbol of prosperity, had become a controlled space of danger. Arjun had taken extraordinary measures to monitor and control every element of Priya's environment. Security cameras were strategically positioned and partially redirected to prevent observation of critical areas while creating an illusion of normalcy. Investigators later determined that these surveillance systems were manipulated to ensure that no witnesses would notice anomalies or intervene. Every step Priya took, every movement within the penthouse, was carefully orchestrated and observed. This calculated control of the environment underscores a level of premeditation rarely seen in crimes driven purely by opportunity. By combining psychological manipulation, physical isolation, and technological oversight, Arjun created an environment in which Priya's vulnerability was maximized, and any potential interference was minimized. Every silent hallway and shadowed corridor played a role in facilitating the deadly plan. Priya's family received subtle warning signs, messages that hinted at discomfort and growing fear, yet none fully grasped the gravity of the situation. Investigators later emphasized that these messages, though brief and cautious, provided a critical early insight into the manipulation she endured. Each plea for reassurance reflected not just concern for her well-being but also the increasing control exerted by Arjun. The juxtaposition of luxury and distress highlights a cruel irony. Within the lavish surroundings meant to symbolize happiness and security, Priya's vulnerability was meticulously exploited. Investigators concluded that the exploitation of trust, coupled with isolation and access to medical knowledge, was central to the success of the crime. These early warnings, overlooked in real time, became crucial evidence for establishing intent and premeditation during the investigation. Every text, every gesture of unease, would later tell the story of a life ensnared by deception and greed. The bathroom where Priya was ultimately attacked bore the marks of meticulous planning. Instruments were sterilized and arranged with precision. Subtle traces of blood hinted at the crime's execution, and every detail had been controlled to minimize detection. Investigators noted that such an environment is rarely accidental. The scene reflected a high level of surgical knowledge and premeditation. Priya's body, weakened by sedatives and isolation, was entirely at the mercy of a calculated perpetrator. Every aspect of the scene, lighting, positioning of instruments, arrangement of towels, was designed to facilitate the act while concealing intent. Forensic analysis would later confirm that this was not an impulsive act, but a crime executed with chilling foresight. Even the smallest details, overlooked by casual observers, were central to unraveling the truth behind her death. The financial trail became a linchpin of the investigation. Investigators meticulously traced payments made to clinics, private accounts, and medical consultants, revealing a premeditated plan of chilling precision. Transactions aligned with research into kidney compatibility and surgical procedures, establishing an unmistakable timeline of criminal intent. Arjun's attempt to disguise these transfers through shell companies and complex accounting ultimately failed under scrutiny. Each statement, each transaction, painted a detailed portrait of deliberate preparation. a calculated orchestration spanning weeks. The financial evidence demonstrated not just motive but also method. The crime was executed through a combination of wealth, access, and meticulous planning. For investigators, these documents proved that the murder was not spontaneous, but a well-conceived scheme executed with methodical efficiency, leaving no room for ambiguity about intent. Surveillance footage provided investigators with critical insights into the crime. Multiple camera angles, though partially manipulated, revealed subtle movements and interactions that exposed inconsistencies in Arjun's narrative. Every step he took, every room he entered, was reconstructed in detail to understand how the crime was executed. Forensic teams noted that manipulation of security systems indicated deliberate intent to isolate Priya while preserving the illusion of normalcy. By carefully analyzing shadows, timestamps, and positioning, investigators were able to map out the calculated choreography of the murder. The footage not only corroborated digital and financial evidence but also revealed the psychological control exerted over the victim, illustrating the depth of planning required to commit a crime of such precision. This layer of evidence was instrumental in establishing premeditation beyond any reasonable doubt. The grief of Priya's family was profound, compounded by disbelief and the realization that she had been deliberately targeted. Investigators emphasized that emotional testimony from parents and siblings played a pivotal role in contextualizing her life, routines, and health prior to the crime. Their accounts illustrated the stark contrast between Priya's usual prudence and the vulnerability created by Arjun's manipulation. Every story, memory, and anecdote contributed to understanding the psychological and emotional environment in which the crime occurred. Witnessing her laughter, diligence, and careful nature juxtaposed with the tragic outcome highlighted the cruel manipulation and betrayal at the heart of the murder. For investigators, these familial insights were critical for constructing a narrative that captured not only forensic facts but also the human cost of premeditated exploitation. Forensic teams meticulously documented every detail within the penthouse, focusing on areas critical to understanding the crime. The bathroom, where instruments had been carefully arranged, became the epicenter of investigation. Gloves, masks, and protective gear were employed as each trace of evidence was catalogued, from microscopic blood residues to fingerprints on surgical instruments. Investigators emphasized that such painstaking analysis was essential to reconstructing the events leading to Priya's death. Every surface told a story. The placement of tools, the arrangement of charts, and even the angles of lighting were analyzed to determine how the crime had been executed. This clinical approach transformed a luxurious space into a crime scene frozen in time, exposing premeditation and deliberate manipulation. Through these forensic methods, the investigators could bridge the gap between suspicion and certainty, providing undeniable proof of both intent and action. The courtroom became the arena where meticulously gathered evidence would meet legal scrutiny. Prosecutors presented financial records, digital communications, and forensic findings, weaving together the narrative of premeditated murder. Witnesses, from medical professionals to household staff, described a chilling sequence of manipulation, isolation, and exploitation. The defense attempted to reframe the events as a tragic accident, but the accumulation of evidence, from encrypted messages to staged medical instruments, left no room for ambiguity. Observing family members were both traumatized and vindicated, as the painstaking work of investigators and prosecutors revealed the truth behind Priya's death. Media coverage emphasized the shocking nature of the crime, highlighting the intersection of wealth, deception, and meticulous premeditation. By the conclusion of proceedings, the court had not only established guilt but underscored the power of evidence, persistence, and investigative rigor in ensuring that even the most carefully concealed crimes could be exposed and justice delivered. The arrest of Arjun Mehra marked the culmination of months of painstaking investigation. Despite his calculated composure, the law finally closed in on him. Investigators emphasized that his wealth and influence, which had facilitated the crime, could not shield him from accountability. The scene, high above the city that had symbolized his power, now reflected the stark reversal of fortune. Detailed evidence from financial transactions, medical consultations, surveillance, and forensic analysis ensured that the arrest was backed by irrefutable proof of premeditation. Every step of the process, from international coordination to procedural adherence, highlighted the complexity of pursuing justice in cross-border crimes involving wealth and sophistication. The fall of a man who had appeared untouchable illustrated a fundamental principle. Meticulous planning, no matter how cunning, cannot ultimately evade detection when investigators are thorough, persistent, and methodical in uncovering the truth. Every step of the process, from international coordination to procedural adherence, highlighted the complexity of pursuing justice in cross-border crimes involving wealth and sophistication. The fall of a man who had appeared untouchable illustrated a fundamental principle. Meticulous planning, no matter how cunning, cannot ultimately evade detection when investigators are thorough, persistent, and methodical in uncovering the truth. In the courtroom, evidence took on a visual form, allowing jurors, family members, and the public to witness the full scope of the crime. Digital timelines, financial charts, and reconstructed sequences of movement highlighted the precision with which Arjun had orchestrated the murder. Investigators had painstakingly documented every action, from medical appointments to financial transfers, and every piece of evidence corroborated the narrative of deliberate, premeditated intent. The visual reconstruction revealed how technology, surveillance, and human compliance had been manipulated to facilitate the crime. The presentation also emphasized the psychological aspect. Isolation, trust, and manipulation of the victim were integral to the plan. By transforming complex evidence into a clear, coherent narrative, the trial not only illuminated the crime, but also underscored the diligence required in modern investigative work to ensure that justice could prevail. The final chapter of this tragedy was both somber and reflective. Priya's family gathered to honor her memory, grieving the life cut short by greed and manipulation, yet finding solace in the knowledge that justice had been achieved. Investigators and legal teams had painstakingly pieced together a case that exposed every facet of premeditation, deception, and exploitation. The story serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of trust, the consequences of unchecked ambition, and the cruel intersections of wealth and human vulnerability. Beyond punishment, the case provides a moral reflection that meticulous planning, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately cannot withstand the perseverance of truth, evidence, and justice. The glow of candles symbolized remembrance, resilience, and the enduring principle that no crime, however well concealed, escapes accountability, leaving a legacy of caution, reflection, and hope.